just heard President Pranab Mukherjee conclude his address to the joint session of the Parliament there in the Central Hall of the Parliament, giving the vision there for the government. Also speaking about the achievements of his government in the last 1 year, picking on several of those yojanas, Pradhan Mantri yojanas, also speaking about the contribution that women have made in strengthening their position. He also spoke about the kind of champions we have produced in sporting arenas. President Pranab Mukherjee speaking on a lot of avenues cutting across different industries and talking about the kind of development we have seen in the last 1 year under the NDA government. Well, at about 12:15, as the time was scheduled, another 10-15 minutes, we would also now begin to hear Finance Minister in the Lok Sabha, where he will table the economic survey, a survey that will outline the vision there of the country, also speak of some projections, contested projections, of course. We've been seeing how several organizations, international organizations, have given projections in the negative as compared to last year. But we'll have to wait and watch what does the government have to say in the economic survey, with, of course, a lot of inputs there coming in from the Chief Economic Advisor as well. That'll happen in about 5 to 10 minutes from now, when Finance Minister Arun on the table lays the economic survey. The big day, of course, is tomorrow, the budget session. The historic budget session, where we'll have the finance as well as the railway budget there being put together. And interestingly enough, a lot of politicking taking place on that already, because the budget, as we know, has been advanced by a whole month. Okay, let's open this up for further inputs and perspective. We have with us Mr. Sanjeev Ahluwalia, advisor to the Observer Research Foundation. We also have with us Mr. Pranjal Sharma, consulting editor of Business World, and my colleague Madhav Das, joining us live at this point of time. Madhav, we'll start with you. We just heard President Pranab Mukherjee there concluding his address to both houses of the Parliament, lining out the vision for the government in the year 2017-18.
Well, yes, in fact, a couple of important points that I'd like to just touch upon, Akshay, that the President spoke about, of course, highlighting very importantly the government's focus towards the poor, saying the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, for instance, is focused really on housing and other schemes which are significant for the poor, as well as, of course, talking about issues such as demonetization, saying it was important from the entire perspective of weeding out black money, as well as hitting out at fake currency and terror, and also promoting cashless transactions. Those were some of the aspects which the President, I beg your pardon, spoke about in terms of demonetization. Also thanking people who've shown a tremendous amount of patience for really standing in line and coming out and supporting the policy of demonetization. At the same time, making a number of important statements, talking about the inclusive nature, whether we're talking about social justice or otherwise, saying that this is very important in terms of the entire society in India, the manner in which, in fact, people of all walks of life need to come together and, in fact, move ahead. Several such important statements that have come in from the President as far as the presidential address, going on to talk about various other aspects from the civil aviation policy to so on and so forth, aspects which would, in fact, help the people and citizens of the country. Important decisions as far as the policy is concerned that the government has taken over the course of the past 1 year. So several important aspects there. The President's speech, of course, will be followed now within the next half an hour. We'll be seeing papers being laid on the table, and of course we will, most important of which is the economic survey, but other important ordinances like the Enemy Property Act, as well as, in fact, the specific Banknotes Act, which was necessitated following demonetization. All of these ordinances also to be laid on the table as far as Parliament is concerned. So we will, of course, have to see what numbers the economic survey throws up. A lot of numbers that opposition parties at the Congress have already beginning throwing up in terms of the real state of the Indian economy. What will the government really have to say, and what impact will demonetization really have had as far as the economy is concerned? All those are going to be laid threadbare once the economic survey is tabled. And of course, the Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramaniam, expected to address a press conference at 1 as well, Akshay.
Okay. Well, do stay with us, please, Madhav. Let me go across to Mr. Sanjeev Ahluwalia, joining us from the studio. Mr. Ahluwalia, we heard the President there, of course, laying out the government's vision, and we're all expecting the economic survey also in some time from now. But everybody really, the issue that concerns each and every individual, every Indian today, is the issue of demonetization, and the figures that will really come out post that? Because we have seen how international organizations like the IMF, the World Bank have given projections which are not in coherence with what the government really was saying. Your thoughts on what all will be in this economic survey this afternoon?
Well, Akshay, I think not just me, but everybody is looking for some certainty, of where exactly we are. So I think the signal achievement of the economic survey would be if they could give us a very definitive status position of where India is today. The demonetization shock, and it certainly was a shock. It was possibly intended to be a shock also. But there were some unintended consequences which may not have been factored in. And I think what everybody wants to know is that to what extent have they affected growth, to what extent, therefore, have they affected revenue collection, and more important, how long is the adverse impact going to last? Because a shock, if it's temporary, if it is short-term, India is a very resilient country, it can get over it.
Okay.
But if this is going to build into a more medium-term kind of negative impact, then the real implication is that the finance minister, when he gets up tomorrow to present the budget, would have to factor that in and have some counter-cyclical policies in place.
But isn't that stating the obvious? We would hope that the finance minister has factored that in, because we understand there has been a slowdown. The government would have us believe it's been a temporary slowdown of sorts in the past few 3 months. And India, like you very correctly pointed out, is a resilient economy. We will come over it. But one would presume that be it the economic survey or the budget tomorrow, the finance minister has taken into account the kind of impact this demonetization must have had on the economy, and based on which they will come out with the figures.
No, absolutely. I mean, most certainly, I'm not trying to suggest that the finance minister will be cavalier or will not recognize reality on the ground. I mean, after all, that's the job of the entire finance ministry.
Sure.
And I'm pretty certain he will do that. But the real issue is, that in, the budget speech, as everybody has pointed out, is a opportunity to communicate.
Right.
Not just with parliamentarians, but with the entire country. Not just the country, it's actually with the entire world.
Right.
Because in India, it is really one of the key policy-making venues which is available to the finance minister and to the government.
Right.
So one hopes that in that context, the finance minister would have taken the steps to allay the kind of fears that you referred to. And all of us have been, struggling with in the last few days. And one does hope that he would also, therefore, have some very explicit steps on the big elephant in the room, which is really, a subject that we have actually consistently kind of ignored since the 1990s. And this has nothing to do with just the present government, even the UPA actually ignored it. And that is, the state of the poor in India. The poor in India is a vast amount of people. They're declining in number, but the numbers become huge. More important, who are the people who are vulnerable to become poor? Because, we think of the poor as one static group.
Right.
As if either you're poor and then once you stop being poor, you become non-poor.
Right.
But that's not the fact on the ground. You can stop being non-poor, but you're so marginally above the poverty line that any shock,
can slip into it.
Demonetization could be one shock, drought could be another shock, climatic shock, systemic shocks, you can slip back into poverty. So it's estimated that the people who are vulnerable to poverty is as high as a minimum of 40%.
Right.
Even though the number of poor that you may actually have who are below the poverty line.
Right.
And let's forget about, what the poverty line should be.
I was just going to come to that, because that is a contentious figure. What is that figure? What is that poverty line that we...
National poverty line, without going into the merits of that.
Okay.
The point I'm trying to make is that even the guys who are above the poverty line,
are as vulnerable.
Are vulnerable to slipping back to poverty.
Right.
So I hope that in this particular budget, because of the circumstances, the FM would take steps to address their fears.
Right. So that, of course, is a major concern we have to look at when we talk of the holistic and the inclusive growth of our country. Madhav, if you are through with us and you're listening to what we are having a discussion here, okay, I'll have to connect with him in a couple of moments because the line is not through. But Mr. Ahluwalia, let's also talk about The GDP projections at the moment, and how worried should we really be? Because you see, the IMF said that because of demonetization, it could come down about 1% from 7.6 as projected. They said it's going to be 6.6. But the other agencies within India have said that maybe not 6.6, we look at something close to a 7.1, whatever it may be, but a slip in that GDP will reflect badly on the government.
Well, you know, it's kind of a double whammy. You see, the reason is that, if you remember, that the GDP series were revised, and growth was consequently shown as being actually higher than it would be under the old series that happened like 2 years back with the new government, right? And then there are good technical explanations as to why this is a better way of calculating growth. But the fear remains amongst a lot of people that, you know, are we overstating growth, right?
Right.
So the fear amongst the same community of people today would be that, hey, one, growth is overstated, and then even the overstated growth may actually not happen.
Interesting.
Right? So it's a double whammy.
It's a double whammy.
So I think that, once again, this is an issue, and I don't think the FM needs to go into it. Probably the economic survey
Yes.
would clarify better as to where, that's what I meant, you know, where are we exactly?
Where India stands at this point of time. Yeah.
Where are we today, and what are the indicators that we as citizens should believe in? Because, you know, I mean, frankly, somebody like me doesn't have the wherewithal to argue with, you know, an economist from the government who says, well, growth is 7%. I'll take him at face value because he represents or she represents the government. And I have full respect and faith in Mr. Arun Subramaniam's integrity, as also in the integrity of the Central Statistical Organization.
Yes.
You know, I mean, they're all very competent people, and even luminaries like Kaushik Basu, who was with the previous government, not with this one, who was also in the World Bank. He has also upheld the way the new GDP figures.
But what would you like to say about what happened yesterday, Mr. Ahluwalia, when we had the former Prime Minister, the former Finance Minister also coming out and giving the real, as they call it, the real true picture of India in that press conference? Would you believe that was just politics being played out? Or, like you said, you would take on face value what the government is saying, but the opposition also sometimes has many inputs that need to be looked at, which the government may want to overlook?
Well, I mean, you know, I think that politicians will play politics. That's their job.
Sure.
So, you know, we can't get away from that. And as I just said, you know, that many of the things that, like, you know, the provision of jobs, for instance, or as I mentioned earlier, a consequence of not having a job is poverty.
Right.
You know, this is not something that happened 2 years ago or started happening 2 years ago.
Right.
This is a continuous trend, right from the end of the 90s when, you know, our liberalization policies really kicked in.
Right.
That we have relied solely on growth to trickle down without adequately ensuring for those who may be left behind. And I think this is a good year for that to change. The Prime Minister has already said that. You know, in his 31st December, New Year's Eve address.
Yes.
I think he changed the whole narrative.
Right.
And it was all, again, about purity, no harm in being pure. But it was also about, you know, helping the poor, the disadvantaged, the marginalized, which one had never heard him say before. Now people will call this populist.
Right.
That he was being populist. You know, I mean, you can say that. But the fact is that the ground reality tells us that it is a sensible way to also be in India.
Absolutely.
A desperately poor land.
Yes, yes.
So I think, you know, what the opposition says, that's the Congress is saying.
Yes.
There's truth in it.
There's truth in what they're saying.
But some of it is because of them too.
Absolutely, they're to be blamed equally. Let's not forget, of course, the fact what they've done in the last 10 years, and that's also questionable by the BJP like they were doing. So we're very correctly like put by you, politicians will play politics over the matter, but there are statistics and data that we have to get into. Madhav, let me come to you now. Interesting conversations happening in the studio of what's expected to unfold in the next couple of minutes when the economic survey is tabled. Projections is something we all are looking at very closely. But tell us about, Madhav, how this is actually really playing out. Yesterday we had the Congress party, we had the former Prime Minister, Finance Minister come out and give out what they call the real true picture. We've had the government also coming out with statistics, but as Mr. Arun Subramaniam, as well as the Finance Minister today will lay threadbare the economic survey today, there will be indicators for us to go by of what we're expecting and where India really stands for 2017-18.
Well, yes, a couple of important indicators really that opposition has been highlighting, and I think would be politically sensitive, as far as this, of course, apart from GDP growth, which, of course, there have been several agencies and there's several versions from the government's version to those of the opposition, as well as several think tanks and foreign financial institutions which have predicted various, perceptions of how far the GDP would be hit. Apart from that, several important aspects like which the Congress particularly was highlighting, post-demonetization is the hit perhaps in rural demand, the demand for goods such as tractors, two-wheelers, etc.
Right.
falling. What does the government statistics, how much will it reveal as far as rural demand is concerned, and how far the impact of demonetization has been on the Indian economy? The government, of course, has said that the tax inflows have drastically increased and are hoping that, in fact, in the next few quarters, all of these factors will help increase government revenues in a drastic basis. How much does the economic survey really hold out on all of those claims
Right.
and promises that have been made by the government? That would be something.